At Southside High, Jamal Carter did everything he could to stay invisible. He moved quietly through the halls, kept his head down, and never made eye contact. That was the only way to survive in a school ruled by the loud, the cruel, and the untouchable. No matter how careful he was, the outcome never changed. Every day he was shoved against lockers, laughed at, his belongings stolen or tossed to the floor like garbage. He endured it all, silently, until they crossed the line. That day, they brought up his father. And something inside Jamal snapped. He had spent years teaching himself how to shrink, how to move like a shadow, unnoticed and untouched. But shadows can stretch, and even the quietest ghosts can rise. That afternoon, as Jamal left his last class and headed toward his locker, he heard the voice that made his stomach drop. "Yo, Carter!" Troy Parker, loud, smug, like the joke had already been told, and Jamal was the punchline. Jamal kept walking, clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd let him go this time. But hope, like peace at Southside High, never lasted long. They never did. A sudden shove from behind sent Jamal stumbling forward. He nearly hit the floor but caught himself at the last second. Laughter erupted behind him. "My bad," Marcus Hill said, voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Didn't see you there, bro." Jamal exhaled slowly, schooling his face into stillness. No reaction, no emotion. That was the rule. But they fed off silence. "Oh, he thinks he can just ignore us now?" Troy Parker stepped in front of him, a smug grin playing on his face. Behind him, Eric Sanders and Marcus flanked Jamal, closing in like a trap. Troy reached for the strap of Jamal's backpack. "What you got in here, huh?" Before Jamal could move, the backpack was yanked off his shoulder. "Damn, this thing's heavy," Troy mocked, unzipping it. "What you got? Bricks? Oh, wait. Just a bunch of nerd stuff." He pulled out books, notebooks, random papers, then turned the whole thing upside down. Jamal's things hit the floor with a slap. Pens rolled under lockers. Loose sheets fluttered like broken wings. His sketchbook landed face down, pages bent and exposed. He reached for it. A foot slammed down on the cover. Jamal froze. Troy leaned in, grinding his shoe into the sketchbook with a cruel smile. "Oh, you want this? Go ahead, Carter. Pick it up. Be a good little nerd and clean up your mess," Troy sneered. Jamal's hand trembled. His chest burned with something between fury and shame. Around them, students stood watching. Some whispered. Others raised their phones, recording. No one moved to help. "Hold up," Marcus laughed, winding up and kicking one of Jamal's textbooks down the hallway like a soccer ball. It slammed into a locker. Pages tore. "Damn, bro. I think he needed that," Eric chuckled. "Oops," Marcus added, smirking like it was all just a game. Jamal's fingers twitched. His father's voice echoed in his mind, calm, firm, certain. "You wait. You don't start it. But when it starts, you end it. Not yet. Not yet." He pressed the rage down, forcing himself to stay still. Troy crouched in front of him, too close, his breath thick with mockery. "You know, Carter," he said low, meant only for him, "I was actually going to let you off easy today." He smirked. "But you keep looking at us like you're better. Like you're too good to speak. Like you're something special." Jamal's jaw locked tight. "But you're not," Troy hissed. "You're nothing. Just some quiet little nobody, hoping someone shows up to save him." Troy leaned in, his smile sharp and cruel. "But guess what? No one's coming, Carter. No one ever does." Jamal looked up, and for the first time, locked eyes with Troy. For just a second, something flickered across Troy's face. Doubt. Maybe even fear. Then it vanished. buried beneath his usual smirk. Troy straightened up. "Go ahead," he said, gesturing to the mess on the floor. "Pick up your crap." Marcus and Eric laughed, like the game was over and they'd already won. Jamal took a slow breath. No words, no reaction. He crouched down, his hands steady now. The first thing he picked up was his sketchbook. He brushed off the dirt, checking for damage, gently straightening bent pages. Then he gathered the rest of his things. Calm, silent, deliberate. Southside Chicago was a place where strength meant survival, and silence was often mistaken for surrender. But Jamal Carter knew better. His silence wasn't weakness. It was restraint, a choice. At 16, Jamal was tall but lean, with eyes that watched more than they revealed. His clothes were simple. His wire-rimmed glasses gave him the look of a quiet, bookish kid. Harmless. And that was exactly how he wanted it. Because in a place like Southside High, where the loudest voices ruled and the smallest ones were crushed, being invisible wasn't cowardice, it was strategy. And Jamal Carter wasn't weak. Far from it. Every morning, before the sun even touched the city, Jamal trained at the gym with his father, Raymond Carter. Raymond's hands told stories his words never did. Scarred knuckles, bent fingers, wrists that had seen too many fights. Once, he'd dreamed of becoming a champion boxer. But life had other plans, a few bad matches, a couple of fixed fights, a career that never took off. Now he ran a modest gym on the South Side, the kind with peeling paint, old posters, and a heavy smell of sweat and grit. But just because his dreams faded didn't mean he had nothing left to give. If anything, he'd learned the most valuable lesson of all. Know when to fight, and when to walk away. It was the lesson he drilled into Jamal every morning, between the rhythm of fists hitting bags and the low hum of determination echoing through the gym. "You're getting faster," Raymond said, eyeing Jamal's crisp 1-2 combo. The punches were clean, controlled, but something was missing. Raymond frowned. "But you're still holding back." Jamal paused, breath heavy. He wiped the sweat from his face. Didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His father saw right through him. Always had. "What's going on?" Raymond leaned against the ropes, arms folded. His voice was calm but firm. "You're moving like you're carrying something heavy. What is it?" Jamal looked down, wrapping the tape tighter around his fists, pulling it like he was trying to keep himself together. Part of him wanted to say it didn't matter. Just another normal day. Nothing new. But the words stuck in his throat. His father would see through the lie anyway. Raymond always did. For a moment, Jamal considered brushing it off, shrugging like it wasn't a big deal. What was the point in talking? Words didn't change anything. Complaining wouldn't make them stop. But then he heard Troy's voice in his head again, the cruel laughter, Marcus's smug grin, the way the crowd just stood there, recording, whispering, pretending not to see. His jaw tightened, his hands curled into fists. He exhaled slowly. Then finally, he spoke. "It's the same thing. Every day," he said. His voice was quiet, but steady. "Troy, Eric, Marcus, they don't stop. Doesn't matter what I do. They shove me, mess with my stuff, say whatever they want." He paused, swallowed. "And no one cares. No one ever says anything." Raymond didn't interrupt, just listened, nodded. Let Jamal speak his truth without pulling it out of him. That was something Jamal had always appreciated. His father never rushed him, never demanded more than he could give. When Jamal finally looked up, Raymond let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand across his short gray beard. "Let me ask you something," he said, voice low. "What's the most important rule in boxing?" Jamal frowned. He already knew where this was going. Don't start a fight you can't win. Raymond shook his head. That's part of it, he said. But the real rule, the one that matters most, is knowing when to stand up. He leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on Jamal's. You don't throw the first punch, but you better throw the last one. You wait for the right moment. The moment they'll never forget. The one that makes sure they never try you again. Jamal sat with those words. His father wasn't pushing him to fight. He was giving him permission to finish it, to make it count when the time came. Not out of rage, not out of pride, but because enough was enough. He nodded slowly, tugging the wraps tighter around his hands. He didn't have to say anything else. Raymond saw the shift in his eyes. The weight Jamal had carried, the quiet frustration, the coiled anger, suddenly felt like something else. Purpose. It wasn't about enduring anymore. It was about preparing. The next morning, Jamal walked into Southside High, just like always, head down, shoulders squared, slipping through the noise and chaos of the hallway. Lockers slammed. Laughter echoed. Sneakers squeaked on tile. Just another day. But not for Jamal. But in the back of his mind, his father's words played on loop. Wait for the right moment. He didn't know if that moment was today. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe next week. But it was coming. And he'd be ready. As he reached his locker, he felt it. That shift in the air. He didn't have to turn around to know. They were there. Hey, Carter. Jamal didn't flinch. He kept his focus on the lock, fingers steady on the combination. Click. Then smack. A palm to the back of his head, not hard enough to hurt, just hard enough to disrespect. Don't ignore me, loser, Troy Parker sneered. Jamal took a breath, slow and deep, before turning. There they were, same as always. Troy with his smug, toothy grin. Eric standing like a silent enforcer. And Marcus already chuckling like he'd said something funny. You look tense, Jamal, Marcus said. Rough night? Still crying about yesterday? Jamal didn't answer. Stillness was his weapon now. Troy stepped in closer, dropping his voice so only Jamal could hear. Or maybe, he said, eyes gleaming, you're mad because everyone saw that video of your old man getting knocked out. Jamal's fingers twitched. Yeah, man. I watched it last night, Marcus chimed in, shaking his head in fake sympathy. Your dad got rocked, like over and over. Dude got hit more than a punching bag. Eric chuckled. Guess getting beat runs in the family, huh? No wonder you never fight back. He smirked. It's in your blood. Laughter echoed through the hallway, loud, cruel, stinging more than any punch. Jamal felt the fire rise in his chest. But he didn't flinch, didn't blink. He stood tall, face blank, calm like the center of a storm. Stay calm. Don't hesitate when the time comes. Let them laugh. Let them believe they'd won. Then, slowly, Jamal turned. His eyes locked on Troy. You guys into boxing now? He asked, voice cool, almost amused. The laughter faltered. Jamal looked each one of them in the eye. Troy, Eric, Marcus, unblinking, steady. Didn't think soft dudes like you could handle real fights. Troy's smirk twitched. Marcus's grin faded. Eric's brow creased. What did you say? Troy growled. Jamal tilted his head, unbothered. I said... He stepped forward. You're soft. The words sliced through the air, sharp and deliberate. The first punch hadn't been thrown. But the fight had already begun. Jamal could feel the tension crackling in the air, his challenge landing like a stone in their chests. Marcus scoffed, trying to laugh it off. Oh, look at this guy. Thinks he's funny now. Eric cracked his knuckles. Nah, he thinks he's tough. Troy's jaw flexed. He stepped closer, his voice a low growl. "You think we're weak?" Jamal didn't blink. "Yeah." The word hit harder than a punch. Troy sucked in a breath, stepped back slowly, fists clenched tight. "All right, Carter," he muttered. "Let's see if you're still talking when we're done with you." Eric grinned, rolling up his sleeves like a bouncer. Marcus cracked his fingers like a pianist before a performance. Jamal's heart slowed, steady like a drumbeat. His body was loose, grounded. He didn't feel scared. He felt ready. He let his backpack drop with a dull thud. Eric lunged first, wild and fast, throwing a right hook that aimed to shut Jamal up. But the punch was sloppy. All power, no technique. It was the kind of swing that only landed when the other kid froze. Jamal didn't freeze. He moved like he'd moved 1,000 times in the gym, like muscle memory. He ducked under the hook, pivoted left, and came up clean with a tight, sharp jab to Eric's ribs. Eric gasped, stumbling back. Marcus hesitated. Troy's eyes narrowed. And Jamal? He didn't flinch. He stepped forward. This time, he wasn't the one being picked on. This time, he was the one in control. Jamal saw the punch coming before Eric even fully swung. The subtle shift in weight, the tense pull of the shoulder, details most wouldn't notice. He dodged left, effortlessly letting the wild fist swipe through empty air. The crowd gasped in surprise. But Jamal didn't stop there. Without hesitation, he twisted his body and drove a sharp counter into Eric's ribs. A heavy thud echoed through the hallway. Eric's breath whooshed out of him, his knees buckling. He crumpled, but Jamal didn't wait. His eyes flicked to Marcus, who was trying to sneak up from the side. Marcus swung, all power and no finesse. Jamal ducked beneath the punch, then surged forward, delivering a brutal uppercut straight into his gut. Marcus choked, stumbling back, clutching his midsection. Troy, watching with narrowed eyes, finally realized this wasn't going as planned. His usual tactic, picking on the weakest, humiliating him in front of everyone, was falling apart. Jamal wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was dismantling them. He turned back to Troy, rolling his shoulders. His stance was calm, almost lazy. He wasn't reckless or even angry. He was controlled, precise, dangerous. Troy clenched his fists, his usual smirk gone. He stepped forward, his eyes locked onto Jamal. "All right, Carter. Let's see what you've really got." Troy was faster than the others, more confident. But confidence didn't win fights. Not against someone who knew exactly when to strike. Skill did. Troy launched a quick jab, testing Jamal's defense. But Jamal saw it coming, tilting his head just enough to let the punch sail past him. Troy followed with another jab, then a right cross. Jamal was already reading his moves, anticipating every shift in his stance. When Troy committed to a left hook, Jamal closed the distance in an instant. He grabbed Troy's wrist mid-swing, his grip tight and unyielding. Troy's eyes widened in surprise. Before he could react, Jamal twisted, throwing him off balance, and landed a sharp right to his cheekbone. Not enough to break anything, but enough to send a clear message. Troy staggered backward, slamming into the lockers with a loud crash. For the first time, he wasn't the one standing tall. He was the one on the floor. The hallway fell dead silent. Phones were out, cameras flashing. Whispers spread like wildfire. Shock replaced the usual mockery. Jamal Carter, the quiet kid they all underestimated, had just taken down Southside High's biggest bully. Eric, still hunched over, and Marcus, gasping for air, didn't even move to help. Jamal stepped closer, looking down at Troy with cold eyes. This was the moment his father had talked about. He could humiliate Troy now, make him feel every ounce of the humiliation he'd caused so many others. But Jamal didn't. He didn't need to. He had already won. But he didn't. He just stared at Troy, his voice calm. "I told you, you're weak." Then, without another word, he grabbed his bag and walked away. The silence behind him was suffocating. Jamal didn't look back. He could feel their eyes on him, their stunned whispers hanging in the air. Moments ago, they had been spectators to his pain. Now, they were witnessing something else, a shift in power, a truth that was impossible to ignore. Troy Parker, the untouchable king of Southside High, was on the ground, and Jamal Carter had put him there. Jamal adjusted his bag on his shoulder, his heart still pounding with adrenaline. It hadn't fully worn off, but he forced himself to stay calm. He didn't regret what he did, not for a second. But deep down, he knew this wasn't over. It never was. The bell rang, snapping the hallway back into motion. Students started to move again, flowing around Jamal like a river around a rock. Some gave him cautious, uncertain looks. Others whispered, their words slicing through the noise. "Did you see that? He took down Troy like it was nothing. I got the whole thing on video. Jamal can actually fight. I've never seen Troy lose before." The words buzzed around him, but Jamal kept walking, his gaze straight ahead. The world around him was different now, but he was the same. Just a kid walking through the hallways, waiting for the next moment, the next fight, the next lesson. Jamal ignored the buzz of voices around him, pushing through the noise. His mind was already focused on what came next. There were always consequences. By the time he reached his next class, the principal's voice crackled over the speaker. "Jamal Carter, please report to the main office immediately." Jamal let out a slow breath. There it was. He didn't rush. He walked at his own pace, each step deliberate. He had expected this, been ready for it since the moment he threw that first punch. Fighting back and winning always had its price. When he entered the office, Troy was already there, sitting in one of the chairs against the wall. His lip was split, and a bruise was already darkening his cheek. There was no smirk on his face now, only a clenched jaw and hands tense in his lap. He looked up as Jamal walked in, their eyes locking in a silent standoff. There was no pride in Troy's gaze now, just anger, and something else, something close to fear. Principal Holloway sat behind her desk, hands folded neatly in front of her. She was a middle-aged woman with sharp features and eyes that had seen too many fights, too many excuses. Beside her stood Officer Daniels, the school cop, arms crossed in that no-nonsense way that made Jamal feel every bit of his reality. His presence alone was a warning. Jamal knew exactly how this looked. A black kid and a white kid sitting in the office after a fight. One of them hurt, the other untouched. "Sit down, Mr. Carter," Principal Holloway said, nodding to the chair beside Troy. Jamal stayed standing. "Am I suspended?" Her expression didn't shift. "You're being reviewed for discipline." Jamal took a slow breath. "For defending myself?" "For fighting." She corrected him with that calm, practiced tone. Jamal glanced at Troy, who was sitting there like the victim, his gaze avoiding Jamal's, like he hadn't started this. "Watch your tone," Officer Daniels cut in, his voice hard as steel. Jamal's fists clenched, the urge to speak out bubbling in his chest. He could argue. He could tell them everything. The months of bullying, the pushing, the stolen things, the insults, how they mocked his father, how they pushed him until he snapped. But would it matter? Would they care? He'd seen how this went before. He wasn't stupid. Instead, Jamal took a sharp breath, letting it out slowly. Fine. What's the punishment? Principal Holloway watched him silently, her eyes unreadable. Then she turned to Troy. 3-day suspension. Both of you. Troy's eyes widened in disbelief. What? Why? You were both part of it, she said plainly. The video proves it. Jamal froze. Video proof. Someone had to have sent it to the school, maybe more than one person. For the first time since entering the office, Jamal felt something he hadn't expected. Justice. Troy stammered, losing his usual cocky composure. That's not fair. Before Jamal could respond, Principal Holloway stood, cutting him off. This meeting is over. You're both dismissed. Troy jumped up and rushed out, his anger clear but unspoken. Jamal remained seated for a moment, letting the weight of it sink in. This wasn't just about winning or losing anymore. It was bigger than that. The video was out. People had seen the truth. When Jamal stepped into the hallway, he felt the change immediately. The same students who used to pass him by without a second glance were now looking his way. Some nodded in acknowledgement, others whispered behind their hands, but none of them treated him like he was invisible anymore. As for Troy, he was gone. For the first time in a long while, Jamal Carter walked through Southside High with a sense of confidence, not as a victim, but as someone they finally saw. By lunch, the fight was all anyone could talk about. The video had spread like wildfire, through school, online, and across social media. Clips were shared in group chats, posted on feeds, and discussed in hushed tones by students who'd never even spoken to Jamal before. But it wasn't just the fight that got people talking, it was everything that led up to it. The months of taunting, the way Troy and his friends had picked on Jamal without facing any consequences. Everyone had seen it happening, but no one had stepped in. Until now. For the first time, people weren't just spectators. They were questioning why it had taken so long. Why did it have to escalate to violence before anyone cared? By the next day, the school was forced to respond. During the morning announcements, Principal Holloway's voice echoed through the speakers, more serious than usual. Many of you are aware of the recent fight on school grounds. It sparked crucial conversations about bullying, harassment, and the kind of environment we're fostering here. The classrooms fell silent. Everyone knew what she meant. Southside High does not condone violence, but we cannot ignore the circumstances that led to it. Many students feel unsafe, ignored, and forced to endure things no one should ever have to face. That stops now. Jamal sat with his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the speaker. He had expected the usual warning about fighting, but this felt different. Starting today, we're implementing new rules to stop bullying. There will be a way to report issues anonymously, and stricter punishments for offenders. This isn't just about discipline. It's about ensuring every student feels safe and respected. Jamal could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Some kids looked uneasy, others deep in thought. A few still doubted, but they were all listening now. Let me be clear. No one should ever feel like they have to fight to be heard. If we've failed you, we'll do better. The announcement ended, but its impact lingered. The conversation didn't fade. It grew louder. Kids who'd kept silent about being bullied started speaking out. Those who had once laughed or looked away began to realize their silence had only fueled the problem. The school's culture, which had allowed kids like Troy to get away with everything, was finally being questioned. As Jamal walked the halls that day, he noticed something different. Troy wasn't smirking anymore. The usual swagger was gone, replaced by uncertainty. His friends, once tightly loyal, were pulling away, their allegiance faltering under the weight of the truth. For the first time, they were the ones being watched. And Jamal didn't need to throw another punch. He'd already won. That afternoon, as Jamal walked home, the cool fall air felt different, lighter. The anger, the frustration of always being pushed around, had faded. Not because the fight had fixed everything, or because Troy and his crew were gone, but because, for the first time, he had stood up for himself, and the world had finally seen him. When he entered his dad's gym, the familiar smell of sweat and leather hit him, along with the sound of fists hitting heavy bags. Raymond was wrapping his hands for his next session, but when he saw Jamal, he didn't need to ask what had happened. He already knew. "You finally stood up for yourself," Raymond said, setting the wraps aside. "Come here," Raymond said. Jamal nodded, nodding toward the ring. His father studied him
Jamal
for a moment,
sighed,
dropping his bag. "I just got out of a fight, old man." Raymond smirked. Jamal hesitated for a second, then stepped into the ring. His father raised his fists. Jamal followed suit. "You did what you had to do," Raymond said, his voice steady. "But a real fighter keeps moving forward." Jamal threw the first punch, sharp and clean. Raymond nodded in approval. Jamal wasn't just fighting anymore. He was growing stronger, inside and out. If you enjoyed this story and want to be part of more meaningful moments, like and subscribe. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you can start your day with important lessons and a little kindness. Talia rose fluidly, her movements deliberate and precise. She met the agent's gaze, offering a subtle nod as she stepped out of the cell. The hall seemed brighter now, the heavy atmosphere of the station lifting with each step she took toward the front desk. As she passed Keller's desk, their eyes met for a brief moment. He opened his mouth to speak but faltered. The words caught somewhere between his heart and his throat. Talia stopped in her tracks, turning to face him fully. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight of unspoken understanding. Keller's chest tightened, the knot in it deepening. He gave a small nod, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. He didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time since joining the force, he felt a flicker of something that resembled pride, but it was quickly overshadowed by doubt. The interrogation room doors slammed shut behind Carter and Sullivan, followed by the sound of raised voices that filtered through the station's walls. The calm before the storm had officially ended. Talia stood at the entrance of the station, her eyes fixed on the scene unfolding within. She watched as the agents moved with precision, systematically dismantling the officers' lies. The storm she had anticipated was finally upon them, and it was only just beginning. Inside the cramped interrogation room, Carter and Sullivan sat rigidly at a small, cold metal table. The tension between them was thick, their bodies' language betraying their growing unease. Agent Price stood across from them, his hands resting lightly on a stack of documents, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched on, heavy and uncomfortable, broken only by the faint hum of the overhead light. Agent Price broke the silence, his voice calm and measured. "Do you want to start with the arrest report, or should we jump straight to the planted evidence?" Sullivan flinched imperceptibly, his eyes darting briefly to Carter for reassurance. He was visibly rattled. Carter, however, was resolute, his tone laced with defiance. "We don't know what you're talking about," he said, his words firm but strained. Price didn't flinch. Instead, he opened the folder in front of him and pulled out a series of printed photos. Slowly, deliberately, he slid them across the table, one by one. They were images taken from the station's security cameras, showing Carter and Sullivan holding an unmarked bag before Talia's car had even been searched. Carter's jaw tightened. but he kept his composure. "That doesn't prove anything," he said, his voice steady, though the edge in it betrayed his inner turmoil. "We were securing evidence." Price raised an eyebrow, leaning forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Really?" "Because these timestamps show otherwise," Agent Price said, his voice unwavering. "And we have audio recordings, courtesy of Miss Porter's hidden surveillance device, that capture your little conversation about how easy it would be to frame her." Sullivan's face drained of color. His hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. You can't use that," he sputtered, his voice rising in panic. "That's entrapment." Price smirked, shaking his head slowly. "Number, it's justice. And it's just the tip of the iceberg." He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. "We've pulled records from your past arrests, dozens of cases with eerily similar patterns. All of them are under review. But let me make one thing clear." He leaned in slightly, his tone cold and deliberate. "You're not walking out of here today." Carter's previously unshakable confidence crumbled. His shoulders slumped, the weight of his own actions crashing down on him. Sullivan buried his face in his hands, the full realization of their corruption finally hitting him like a freight train. Meanwhile, in the bullpen, Keller sat at his desk, his gaze fixed on the unfolding scene in the interrogation room. He had been called in earlier to confirm details about the station's processes, but now, for the first time, he felt the heavy, accusing gaze of Carter and Sullivan. Their realization that someone from within had turned on them was unmistakable. As the agents returned to the bullpen, Keller stood, his hands trembling slightly. He approached Agent Price, his voice uncertain as he cleared his throat. "What happens now?" he asked, his words feeling weightier than he had anticipated. Price met his gaze, his expression softening ever so slightly. "Now," he said quietly, "we clean house. And you did the right thing?" He paused, studying Keller's face closely. "You did the right thing." Keller nodded, a small wave of relief washing over him. For the first time since joining the force, he felt something he hadn't expected: purpose. Near the station's entrance, Talia stood, her gaze fixed on Carter and Sullivan as they were led out in handcuffs. The once arrogant officers now looked defeated, their eyes downcast as they were escorted past their colleagues. The station buzzed with hushed murmurs, officers exchanging stunned glances as the weight of the situation sank in. Agent Price approached Talia, his face neutral but respectful. "We've got everything we need," he said. "Your work here is done." Talia nodded, her composure unbroken. "Good. Make sure it sticks." Price smiled faintly, a touch of admiration in his eyes. "It will." As Talia stepped outside, the crisp air hit her face, carrying with it a sense of finality. The weight that had burdened her for weeks began to lift, replaced by a quiet satisfaction that only came with knowing justice had been served. In the days that followed, the fallout from the investigation sent shockwaves through the town. Carter and Sullivan's arrests made headline news, their faces plastered across every screen. The charges against them were damning, but what shocked the town even more was the revelation of the depth of their corruption. It became clear that the officers had exploited their positions for years, framing innocent people, manipulating evidence, and sabotaging investigations for personal gain. Talia's charges were formally dropped, and the cases tied to the officers' misconduct were reopened. The station underwent a massive overhaul, with several officers resigning under heavy scrutiny. Keller, now viewed as a whistleblower, received mixed reactions from his colleagues, but he stood tall, knowing he had made the right choice. Weeks later, Talia sat on a park bench, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. The autumn leaves rustled around her, their vibrant hues a reminder of how things could change. She had returned to her quiet life, her mission complete, but the experience lingered in her mind. Agent Price joined her, his presence a rare moment of camaraderie. "You could have handled this differently," he said, sitting down beside her. Talia smirked, taking a sip of her coffee. "And miss the look on their faces? No thanks." Price chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You've got a knack for making things memorable." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the weight of their work momentarily forgotten. For Talia, the storm had passed, but the impact of her actions would ripple on, ensuring justice prevailed. At least for now. The news spread like wildfire. Within hours of Carter and Sullivan's arrests, every local and national outlet had picked up the story. The scandal was everywhere, the truth undeniable. The town's trust had been shattered, but in its wake, there was a sense of accountability. The system wasn't perfect, but sometimes the right choice could make all the difference. Police corruption exposed. FBI takes down dirty cops in Arlington, read the bold headline on one major news site. Footage of the officers being led out in handcuffs played on a loop, their faces grim, stripped of the arrogance they had worn so openly. Talia Porter's name was intentionally kept out of the media, a calculated decision by her team. The focus needed to remain on the systemic issues at the station and the actions of the officers involved, not on her role in uncovering the truth. She preferred it that way. She had no interest in fame, only in results. In a sterile, windowless interrogation room at a federal detention center, Carter and Sullivan sat across from their lawyers. The bravado they once held had evaporated, replaced by desperation. The charges against them were overwhelming: falsifying reports, planting evidence, and abusing their authority in dozens of cases. "This is bad," Sullivan muttered, his voice shaky. "They've got everything: audio, video, the files. What do we do now?" Carter, usually the more confident of the two, remained silent, his eyes staring blankly at the table. The weight of their actions had finally caught up with them, and it was clear there would be no easy escape. His jaw clenched. "We fight it," Carter said finally, though the conviction in his voice was weak. The words hung in the air, but it was clear their lawyers weren't optimistic. The mountain of evidence was insurmountable, and public outrage had already tipped the scales against them. Plea bargains were their only chance of avoiding decades in prison. Back at the Arlington Police Department, the fallout continued. Internal investigations unearthed more officers involved in similar misconduct, and resignations flooded in as higher-ups scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. The chief of police held a press conference, emphasizing a commitment to transparency and reform. But the damage to the department's reputation was already irreversible. Keller found himself at the center of the storm. Praised by some, ostracized by others, his role in exposing the corruption had placed him under a microscope. Some colleagues avoided him, their loyalty to the old guard still intact, while others quietly expressed their support. Keller didn't care. He had done what was right, and that was enough for him. A week after her release, Talia met Keller in a small diner on the outskirts of town. The atmosphere was quiet, almost serene, a stark contrast to the chaos that had consumed both of their lives. The weight of everything they'd been through hung between them, but in that moment there was a brief pause, a chance to breathe. Keller sat across from Talia, his fingers nervously tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "I wasn't sure you'd show up," he admitted quietly, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Talia raised an eyebrow, a faint smile playing at the corner of her lips. "You earned this conversation," she said. "Not many people would have done what you did." Keller's gaze dropped to the table, his expression a mix of conflict and doubt. I couldn't keep looking the other way, he murmured, his words heavy with regret. But honestly, I don't know if it made a difference. The department's still a mess, and people like Carter and Sullivan. There are more of them out there. It made a difference to the people they hurt, Talia replied, her voice firm, unwavering. And it made a difference to you. Don't underestimate that. Her words hung in the air, their weight more than just reassurance. Keller allowed himself a small smile, the tension in his chest easing for the first time in a long while. "What about you?" he asked, his voice softer now. "What happens now?" Talia leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable, like she was already miles ahead of him. "Now, I move on to the next mission." "There's always another fight," she said, her voice tinged with quiet resolve. Months later, Carter and Sullivan stood in court, their fates sealed. They pled guilty to multiple charges, each receiving a lengthy prison sentence. Their careers were over, their reputations in ruins. For the first time, they faced the consequences of their actions, their arrogance replaced by the harsh reality of accountability. The cases against them had sparked an irreversible change, one that reverberated beyond the walls of the Arlington Police Department. They had built their careers on lies, but everything they'd constructed came crashing down. The falsehoods they'd hidden behind were torn apart, and innocent people who had suffered under their corruption were finally exonerated. The community, once paralyzed by fear, now rallied for deeper reforms, using the scandal as a powerful catalyst for change. In a quiet moment, Talia sat in her sparsely furnished apartment, packing a small bag. The dossier on the table was filled with the details of her next assignment. She glanced at it briefly, but her mind was already focused on the road ahead. The phone on the counter buzzed, and she picked it up. Agent Price's voice came through the line, calm and direct. "Ready for the next one?" Talia smiled faintly, a quiet confidence in her words. "Always." She stepped into the crisp evening air, the door clicking shut behind her. The weight of the fight lingered, but for now she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Justice had been served, and the truth had prevailed. The road ahead would be just as treacherous, but for Talia, knowing that her actions had made a difference, that the truth had risen above the lies, was enough. The work was never finished, but tonight the victory was hers. And so the truth came to light. The corrupt officers who thought they could bury their crimes faced the consequences of their actions. The woman they had tried to frame walked away victorious, stronger than ever. This story serves as a reminder. No matter how deeply the lies run, justice has a way of finding its path. The fight for truth, for what's right, never ends. That no matter how deep the lies, the truth will always find a way to shine through. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more gripping tales like this, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support means the world and helps bring these stories to life. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.